Hello, and welcome to the He Said, She Said podcast. I'm Doug Austin, editor of eDiscovery Today, and I'm the He Said.
And I'm Christy Burke, president and founder of Burke & Company, and I'm the She Said.
Welcome to our podcast, where we'll discuss interesting and educational trends within the legal and eDiscovery communities. In today's podcast, we're examining the recent challenges in managed document review and the transformation of managed review that has taken place to address those challenges. And we have 4 industry thought leaders who've been at the forefront of addressing those challenges and driving that transformation. Christy, would you like to introduce our panelists?
I sure would. Thanks, Doug. We are very pleased to have some really distinguished panelists with us today to speak about this interesting topic. So let me introduce in alphabetical order by last name. First, we have ChrisBaker, who is Senior Attorney Manager of Managed Review Delivery and Operations at Cobra Legal Solutions. Curran, who's Executive Vice President of Integrated Services at Cimplifi. Matt Daimler, who's Senior Vice President and General Manager of HaystackID, and Clare Frazer, who's Global Head of Managed Review at Integreon. For today's format, we have some initial questions about managed document review for all the panelists to answer, and then each individual speaker will drill down and answer a detailed question. Finally, we'll have our experts comment on project management technology and the future of document review. So without further ado, let's get into the discussion. Our first question is for all 4 panelists in the same order that I just introduced you all. And this question is, tell us how you came to work in the managed document review field and what your current role and responsibilities are in your current position. So Chris, can we start with you, and then we'll go Aisling, Matt, and Claire. Chris, take it away.
So after working as a commercial litigator with a couple of different global law firms, I was a bit at a crossroads in my own career, trying to determine next steps, what I really wanted to do, and it boiled down to, as it often does with employment, the right fit. And I was fortunate enough to encounter Cobra Legal Solutions, which was in an industry, the discovery industry, which was rapidly transforming. We were presented with different challenges, and the constant evolution of workflows every day created a intellectual and creative challenges that really scratched that itch that I hadn't always encountered in law firm practice. And then just the right people, working with folks who were solutions oriented, that were not only collegial, but invested in my own development within the industry, but with pushing the industry forward at large. And I ended up in a role of where I coordinate and head up the entire US managed review team, collaborating with our other departments to keep that running smoothly 99% of the time, and coordinating with our counterparts with foreign review out of our India offices, and both their eDiscovery team and managed review team.
Thanks, Chris. Aisling, how about you?
Hi there. Yes. So Aisling Curran, I work at Cimplifi. I'm the EVP of Integrated Services, which is essentially our umbrella term for our staffing team, our review team, our eDiscovery team, project management team, and analytics. So I help all of those folks hopefully enjoy their jobs and be successful. And I actually started as a contract attorney many years ago, found a door into project management, came up into the industry and learning the ins and outs of it as a project manager. At some point then I did some internal change management stuff and started to think about initiatives and big picture planning, and then shifted to various vendors. But one of my roles was on the product side for at that point, a new idea around a self-service, end-to-end self-service tool for our clients. Super interesting stuff. It was really cool to get a different perspective on the user and the client need, and a different way to deliver on that. And now I've shifted back to the client services side of the fence at Cimplifi.
Thanks, Aisling. Matt, you're next.
So Matt Daimler, Senior Vice President, General Manager of Review Operations globally, also a partner at Haystack. Been in the e-discovery and review space for about 22, 23 years with a focus primarily on the document review side for the last 15. And again, my job is to make sure that from a global perspective that we are delivering what I consider best in breed review services for our clients.
Thanks, Matt. Claire, last but not least, you're next.
Thanks. I'm Clare Frazer. I head up our managed review business here at Integreon. In my previous life, I was a practicing solicitor here in the UK, but I guess like others on this call and so many people in the industry, I decided that was not the way for me. I was on the wrong path, and I went off in search of pastures new, needing to pay my bills. A friend told me about great contractor work that you can do. You know, this doc review thing that you can do, paid by the hour, you get overtime, you can go in, do your job, go home, forget all about it until the next day. So I started on that path, and I did a few projects at Integreon, and my then boss was over from New York, covering a whole load of roles because we were getting really busy. One of those roles was interim review manager, and so he asked if I would come on as a permanent review manager so he could finally go home, see his family, and get on with his life. So that was early 2013. Fast forward 2022, I'm now the managing director of our global review business, as I said. And so essentially anything to do with managed review here at Integreon, that's me. I'm involved in all of it. And we offer managed review services globally from permanent delivery locations in the US, the UK, India, and the Philippines, and of course now remotely. We also offer transactional support in locations where we don't have a permanent presence, and that's either on site or also now these days remotely.
Great, thanks so much, Claire. Okay, all four of you have this question for you, and we'll start with Chris again. From your perspective, how has managed document review changed the most since the pandemic lockdowns began in March 2020? Which of those changes do you think will be permanent and why? And please include mention of additional security measures that were put in place and innovations to make effective review possible from home offices, geographic work shifts to US and global locations, et cetera. A tall order, I know, but I know you're up to the task. So Chris, take it away.
So the key and principal shift, major shift for Cobra Legal Solutions was transitioning both our US and India operations from primarily on-site review in large review spaces where we had anywhere from 30 to 200 attorneys reviewing on specific projects, to transitioning all those folks out into remote review at the outset of the pandemic. I think we all recall a couple of years ago as the NBA shut down and businesses started to shut down, this tremor going through all industries. And I'll tout our company's nimbleness in effectively turning that switch in a matter of 2 or 3 days, outfitting our attorneys with the laptops necessary, the remote desktop security necessary to ensure that client data was protected, reformatting our workflows to ensure that we were better able to monitor both productivity, security measures that were being complied with. As to the most challenging aspect of this shift, it would be the ability to engage our attorneys, in particular, several of which are contract attorneys, in the project, to ensure that they were invested, to ensure that they were getting the feedback that they needed, to ensure that they were being heard about their concerns, the project, that their questions were being answered. And of course, as we experienced globally, ensuring that everyone was doing okay, both on the client side and our contract attorney side. It was checking in to make sure that people were feeling healthy, physically healthy, mentally healthy, And so we devised new methods of, again, reaching out, making sure to put those on our calendar reminders across the board. And obviously that gets a little bit more difficult when you're dealing with a project with hundreds of folks, but carving out that time to check in, but also again, on the other side, checking in with our clients to see what their anxieties were, what their concerns are, and making sure that those are being addressed at the same time. That kind of transitions into what the major shift that I think will be permanent is this newly heightened concern about how everyone is doing, because I don't believe that we will ever be 100% back all in a single place. We're going to lose a lot of those water cooler discussions, or even being able to feel out body language as to how folks are doing. We don't have as many in-person client meetings. Zoom and Teams meetings are here to stay. So is checking in both with the client side and our attorneys that we are working with to be able to ensure that they're all engaged, invested in a unified endeavor, but also ensuring that they are doing well, that no one feels isolated, no one feels underserved or looked in this process that, as we all know, can be quick and fast, and there are deadlines and priorities, and training ourselves to take a beat, a pause, and say, hey, how's everyone doing?
Great, Chris. Thanks so much. Aisling, can you give us your answer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that probably most of us would echo what Chris just said. You know, remote review, understanding where your reviewers are at in their job, and also just from a morale perspective. I don't think that remote review is going to change. I think it is now the new normal. I think that, sure, we can, and we have in the last 2 years done on site. They have been like maybe 1%, if even that, of the reviews we've done. But, you know, I think that's going to come maybe at a higher cost point, just because now you need to actually have physical space. So it'll come at a premium. And I think what I'm seeing from, because as I said before, you know, I'm on the staffing side and the management review side. And so for me, I think as a former contract attorney, they have more power right now. They have more flexibility. They have more ability to pick and choose. They can and they have moved all over the country, and they're still getting the New York rates because it's all remote. So, you know, great. So this is now how do we pivot, and how do we be successful in this new paradigm? So, and also I would say the second thing that is heightened for us is managing. Just, it's more overhead. You have to be more engaged. You have to actually nurture those relationships. I think that we've done a great job at Cimplifi of finding a solid team of contract attorneys and keeping them with a steady stream of work, and just treating them like they're part of the team and including them in our choices. And all that stuff needs to just keep happening. And I don't think it's going to go back.
Got it. Thanks, Aisling. Matt.
So, you know, I think for us, it's a little different. You know, I you know, kind of pride ourselves as the pioneers of remote review, have been doing it for about 10 years now. And you know, years ago, before COVID, we had this pool of attorneys that no one ever looked at because they weren't around the traditional brick and mortar locations. So we had them as kind of our own personal reviewers. Where now, you know, every document review company is in the remote world. So everyone is pulling from the entire US versus just the traditional New York, DC, you know, low cost area, Carolinas, Florida, et cetera. So now everyone's looking at the same pool of attorneys. So for us, in the beginning, it was kind of scary. But at the end of the day, what it's really done is it's allowed the attorney industry to get better, right? The more work that they do, not just with me, but across, you know, all the other companies on this call and the other companies that are in our space, the more work that document review attorneys do, the better they get. You know, we feel that document review services is a skill set. It's not just because anyone can do it that went to law school and passed the bar, doesn't have a job, they can do document review. You have to be able to speed read, issue comprehend, and you have to want to do the work. So the more work that the contract attorneys have, the better that they will be. So for us, we really look at it as it's allowing the contract attorney workforce to stay employed and to get better. So for that perspective, it's been really a benefit to everyone that we're all looking at kind of the same kind of pool now versus just, well, you know, I'm the leading provider in New York, so I'm going to employ more. So I'm going to get the better attorneys in New York. So it's kind of leveled the basis from that perspective. You know, from a security, basis, you know, we deploy very high-end security resources to allow us to deploy kind of best of breed and make sure that our clients' data is secure. But I think it also goes above and beyond, right? You've got to be able to understand who you're dealing with, right? What kind of internet connections do these people have at home? So your questions from a recruiting perspective have to be different. You know, what kind of infrastructure do they have at their home office? Are they sitting on their couch with their kids running around eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and trying to review documents? So, you know, you really have to understand the remote world isn't just, well, okay, you were a great attorney working in our New York office, let's send you a laptop, have you work from home and expect the same exact result we got when you were in the brick and mortar than when you're working from a remote perspective. So again, I think from our perspective, having more competitors in the remote space, yes, it makes our life a little bit more difficult. But again, I think from an inventory perspective, it's making the attorneys better.
Thanks, Matt. Claire.
I'm not going to repeat what a lot of others have said. Obviously, the biggest change is where people are conducting review, right? You know, they're doing it in a virtual office, physically sat in their own home instead of physically sat in a delivery center in an office building in a city somewhere. As has already been said, you know, the human effort involved in rolling that out for those of us who didn't do remote review beforehand, it can't be underestimated. It was an incredibly intense few weeks for everyone at every level. But I think essentially the overarching change really is perception, perception of the best way to get the job done, and also perception of the best place to get the job done from, not just home versus the office, but geographically, onshore versus offshore. Process, workflow, methodology, all of those things, they're exactly the same. They're just implemented in a slightly different way. That implementation just looks a little bit different. But that said, that change implementation hasn't had an impact on productivity or on the quality that we're seeing from our review, from our work product. From a security perspective, again, we're not less secure. It's the same level of security, but the tools that we use just look slightly different. So for us at Integreon, our reviewers log into our Citrix environment and they access the virtual office that way. Information can transfer in and out of the Citrix bubble, you know, so their emails are in there, the data is in there. That's kind of very secure. We thought in March 2020 that our clients were going to insist on, you know, some sort of biometric identification tools and technology being in place. We didn't see that requirement. We didn't see that demand come to the fore. And you know, I mean that's a good thing. It's made it much easier logistically for us. But actually, I was at an industry event last week, which was talking about the ethical side of AI, and it raised a few examples of when people have been miscategorized. Because the technology is still in the growth phase, right? It's not perfect as yet, and so that perfect solution isn't out there. I just don't think we've seen it as commonly as we thought we would. And obviously, there's also the privacy concerns that come alongside that, which are very much a talking point in the industry at the minute.
Thank you, Claire, and thanks to all the panelists for your insightful answers to those questions. I'm now going to turn it over to Doug, who has some individual questions for our panel. Doug.
Thanks, Christy. So let's talk offshore review for a moment. Chris, you noted previously that Cobra Legal Solutions has an extensive offshore review team. So how have the perceptions changed regarding offshore managed document review with clients in recent years, and how has the delivery of offshore managed document review services changed to meet client needs?
So the demand for offshore review has remained steady, in particular as I think even more accepted as the industry at large has shifted to remote review. We've become a more global society, a more global industry and interconnected industry. You know, with the pandemic, offshore review faced many of the same obstacles that have been discussed already, such as contract review attorney engagement, trying to mimic the collective in the room experience of large scale reviews, increased time monitoring and analyzing productivity on remote reviews. And it really becomes about assuring clients that these measures are in place, but not only assuring them as to the measures that are in place, but evidencing to them that the measures that we have in place are effective through concrete data, concrete metrics that shows them, again, we are monitoring productivity, that we are monitoring security, and that this has led to actually more efficient reviews. And this is, I think something that we've seen is both domestically and abroad, productivity, whereas, that was a big concern that we'd see productivity dip. We've actually seen an increase in productivity because, in particular, in our Chennai offices, our attorneys, which are staff attorneys, travel sometimes upwards of 2 hours in each direction to our offices, and 3-4 hours of their day in their commute, and they'd arrive exhausted before the day had begun. And now with a working from home model, we see folks that are much more efficient, much more fulfilled in what they're doing. We're not seeing that burnout, and it's burnout, again, wasted on bus rides and transit back and forth. So, we still are encountering challenges that we might not frequently here domestically. Again, internet connectivity has been an issue, which we have set up individual routers for our review attorneys, electricity infrastructure, power grid. I shouldn't say that's unique to India, being from Texas myself. Our grid's not the most reliable, but that's something that we've had to encounter, deal with some of those downtime issues, and also cultural issues, differences and labor laws. But the key through all of this has been, as it's always, transparency with the end client, addressing these things in a clear, consistent manner, and not only letting them know what the issues that we are encountering are or might be, but providing them with the concrete solutions that we are putting into place. That those solutions are still going to lead to a secure work product, data is going to be secure, and that is efficiently and proficiently done.
Great, thanks, Chris. So now we'll take a look at addressing the need for remote review teams to communicate. Clare, as you know, communications within review teams are an essential part to keeping the reviewers on the same page. So how has that changed in the advent of increased remote review, and how do reviewers in general feel about working remotely instead of in the office?
Absolutely, communication really is key to a successful managed review, and not just on the reviewer level, at every level. Everyone involved needs to be very transparent and to communicate, because it can be a tough job sometimes. But for the team, of course, sitting in the room together, it brings everyone together at an early stage. So it's very easy to lean over to your neighbor and say, hey, does this look weird to you? Or what do you think about this document? And certainly in the old days when we were in the office, we would encourage discussion on the delivery center floor because we found it was a really good way to gain some insight into what the team were seeing on an ad hoc basis. But it's much easier for a project manager to communicate on the fly, right? If you're sitting in the room with people, that's an easier process. That said, we find with the chat options that we have available to us, video calls, that we've been able to recreate that team spirit remotely. So our project managers, they spend a lot of time at the beginning of the project and building a rapport with newer members to the team, and really encouraging people to shout out if they see something that doesn't look right, shout out if they've got a query, shout out if they see something really important. And they do that by kind of making sure that the reviewers are aware of just how important they are to the overall process, so that they know, what they're going to say. It's going to be really valuable to everyone involved. We have regular feedback sessions, regular team meetings, and one-to-one catch-ups, and that's nothing new to anyone. Of course, it happened before the pandemic, but it's just a little bit more frequent than it was previously. And I think the PMs themselves, they've taken on quite a lot. They've had to add quite a lot to their plate with this move to remote, and they've had to very quickly learn how to tweak their previous management style so as to get the same results in the virtual office that they saw in the physical office. Reviewers, do they like working remotely? I think it's fair to say absolutely. From what we've seen, they love it. And similar to Chris's point, I think it's really benefited the lives of many of our reviewers who previously maybe struggled to juggle all of their home commitments alongside a daily commute, long hours in the office sometimes. And again, to Matt's earlier point, it's opened up those opportunities for keen, skilled talent to work with companies that previously they couldn't because they weren't within a commutable distance. And so companies like Integreon, we were missing out on some of that talent, and the people who were not able to access, well, they had less opportunities available to them. And I think overall, the ease burden on reviewers has meant they're a little bit less stretched. They're happier than they were previously, and that's a huge benefit, and it can't be underestimated. If morale is good in your team, you're going to see good results. It's also, I think, with the flexibility that the reviewers now have before them, it's much easier for them to commit to last minute overtime requirements. And so inevitably, 5 p.m. Friday night call that comes in, we had one last Friday, comes in all the time. It's real benefit for our clients because we can very easily, get people to kind of stay on, to jump on over the weekend or do whatever we need to do. They win because they get paid some overtime. We win because it's not such a scramble as it was before, and our clients win because they get what they need delivered on time. At the same time, I think, there is something to be said about face-to-face contact, and some of our reviewers definitely miss that opportunity to interact with the colleagues. I think we all do. We've had some really, really good remote team building events over the past 2 years, but there's just something to be said about sitting face to face and catching up with someone, particularly after a long time. The industry event that I mentioned earlier, it was everyone was very excited to be in the room together again, which was really great. I think now we're returning to I think we'll call it the new normal now. That's what people have been calling it so far. But our reviewers are going to have much more opportunity, and not just our reviewers, but the whole company are going to have much more opportunity to see each other in person, not just on a project level, but also, it's something that we're going to be pushing and encouraging, over the next year, getting those face-to-face team events back up and running.
Great, thanks, Claire. So speaking of remote review, Matt, you've already mentioned HaystackID was doing remote review long before the pandemic. So you were in a very strong position to succeed when the pandemic hit. However, you've had a lot of competition come up around you since as a result. How has remote review evolved to be more intuitive and useful for its clients? And what surprised you about recent developments or trends in the field?
So the biggest thing is that, again, when, we had call it 1,000 people that we would use over and over and over and over and over again. The more that, other people are now pulling from that same, let's call it 1,000 people, right? We've had to really branch out and start looking at, people that we might not have used in the past. And what we found is that, again, when you're talking about a remote employee versus an on-site employee where you can control different certain criteria, right, internet and so on and so forth, that you have to go through kind of a different level of vetting. You got to make sure that, again, when you're asking the questions around, right, what is their home infrastructure look like, what is their internet look like, to make sure that you know, all of those resources are going to be what you need them to be. But you also have to make sure that you're going through a different level of vetting your particular candidates, right? So, you know, document review being a skill set, right? You want to make sure that you are wading through, right? The US has more, you know, out of work attorneys than anyone else in the world. Just because they have a law degree does not mean that, you know, it's somebody that you want to employ. So you got to go through a different vetting schedule to make sure that, again, the people that you're employing are the people that you should be employing. So we spent a lot of time going through and making sure that from a selection perspective, they are an attorney that's going to match the criteria that that particular client is looking for. From a skill set perspective, from a industry perspective, does they have antitrust experience, do they have IT experience, IP experience, etc. To again make sure that you're giving the attorney, your client, the right attorneys for the right project based on the criteria you're looking at. You know, where I see the kind of, you know, from a business perspective, right, this is where it's going to be, right? So, you know, on-prem work at some point in time will come back to an extent, but it's going to be, you know, do we have to pay, you know, premiums, right, to allow attorneys to want to go back in their car and want to go back to sitting, you know, less than 6 feet from their employees, or do we have to build out infrastructures where you now have the distance and so on and so forth, right? So again, remote is going to be the first selection, and then on-prem is going to be for those particular projects that the client is just not comfortable for whatever particular reason with the remote workforce.
Great, thanks, Matt. Christy, I'll turn it back over to you for the last couple of questions.
Thanks so much, Doug. I'm going to now switch over to speaking about project management and technology. Aisling, this is over to you. So how have you seen the project management and technology, including machine learning technologies like TAR, sides of MDR, managed document review, changing in recent years? And how and for what use cases are analytics being used to accelerate the process?
Yep. So on the tech side of the fence, I think that some of the most significant changes I think that we've seen are we're all in end-to-end tools, right? If you think back like 10 years ago, you probably have 5 different tools, you process in one, image in another, or OCR in another one, review in one, potentially even move them to another tool for Priv, as I did in my early days. So yeah, so we have this much more streamlined process where the user experience is actually prioritized, and it just makes the end-to-end management of a matter simpler. We're building tools and we're seeing tools where it's a much more intuitive way to interact with your data. And I think also then with that, with the simplicity that we're building tools or the simple user experience, we're able to actually integrate analytics in a much more digestible format. So now you don't have to, you know, have a analytics tool over here and do all this workflow to get the data into it and bring in a data scientist to implement pretty, what we would consider today, like threshold workflows. So I think that, you know, all of the development of the tools, and we see them on the marketplace right now. And, you know, if you think about it, just, you know, in this e-discovery experience and the idea of better technology and better AI, it's no longer an added benefit or a convenience. It's actually a necessity, just thinking about the proliferation of data sources and all the data we're thinking about, right? And so all of the tech, the new tech, and the streamlining of the experience and integrated implementation of analytics is really just kind of shifting the managed review experience more to less about looking at individual documents, as we all know, and more to just kind of getting to the information you need to get to. So I think it's more about the information and less about the documents, and the technology is really empowering teams to be able to better do that. I still think that we have a tremendous amount to go, but I think that it is changing the management of document reviews just in how we use these tools. I think a really cool example is Disco. You know, it's so integrated that you almost don't even have to turn it. I think you just literally, I think it's like you toggle a switch and you're coding documents, and in the background, the technology is being trained to code alongside of you and then can leapfrog ahead of the team, right? Think about that 10 years ago. Like, it'd be 5 different tools and like a lot of really smart people in a room. And then on the PM side of the fence, I would say, again, coming back to ease of use, drive simpler workflows. Your employees, your PMs, they have more power at their fingertips. And things are easier and faster to get done, which I think leaves a lot of space for the PMs now need to be more aware of the need, the use case. What are we trying to discover today? And so you could have a whole kitchen of tools, but if you don't know how to use them, you know, you're not going to get the cake that you want, right? So the PM does need to dig into what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to uncover? Because there are different ways I can use this tool to different ends. And that kind of goes to the other part of the question into use cases. How are they using the tools today? I mean, I think, you know, threading is out of the box these days in most tools. And so, you know, traditional clustering to identify key issues or even prioritize a review. But then, you know, you can get into AI model building in order to enable a more like efficient compliance process. And there's also ECA, using analytics in ECA or pre-litigation workflows in order to make a risk assessment. And then with like incoming productions, using categorization workflows on previous issue coding in order to learn more about that incoming data. It just, all of these are towards, these use cases are towards uncovering the information that you need to get to at more efficient costs and within better timelines, right? So I think, yeah, that's how I see it.
Great, thanks so much, Ashley. That's awesome detail on that. So we have time for some short takeaways from each of the panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to Doug to close. So our question for all 4 of you speakers is, what single factor over the next few years do you think will be most likely to revolutionize how managed document review will be conducted in the future? Chris, we'll start with you.
Well, just to pivot off of some of the things that Ashley was discussing, AI is here to stay. Whether we're talking about TAR, CAL, analytics are evolving at a breakneck pace. So from our perspective, it is, how do we scale up the human resources to ensure that we are fully and appropriately using and leveraging that evolving tech? Again, whether it's educating our PMs, our review managers on these integrated products, having them understand the full EDRM process, not just their piece of that process, educating them on the tools that we use, and ensuring that they are not only using those in their review workflows, but also in their QC processes and the review team themselves. Just because a reviewer might only be looking at one specific part of that, ensuring that they understand what went into getting to the point where they are looking at a specific document gives them the perspective necessary to appropriately categorize code and provide the input into the document that is necessary. Additionally, I would say it's educating clients as to what's coming down the pike so that they understand the benefit of the technologies that are evolving. What we were using a year ago is changing so quickly that, you know, what was understood to be AI or TAR or continuous active learning review is different from project to project. And so keeping them abreast as to the changes and again, what is the value added and providing them that concrete data of this is where we're gaining efficiencies and accuracies. And then lastly, I would say, you know, educating the legal community at large, our judges, our in-house counsel, as to these evolving technologies. If we have a federal judge who's been on the bench for 30, 40 years, and we can't convince them that, you know, cutting off a cow review at a certain point makes sense and is legally supportable, you know, it's not, the client's not going to accept it. So again, involving ourselves on podcasts like this one, but also in the legal community to make sure that the message is getting out there that these technologies are getting better, more efficient, and how it actually works in an understandable layman's terms so that folks feel comfortable.
Thanks, Chris. Aisling, can we get a quick takeaway from you?
Yep. What single factor will revolutionize document review? I mean, I think that one of the things that keeps smacking me in the face is how we currently communicate culturally. If you think about, I mean, I'm constantly Googling, what does this acronym mean? You know, there's emojis. You know, we are in a space where we're not talking about documents anymore. I mean, think about how you communicate at work with all of this remote work. There's Slacks, there's Zooms, there's texts, there's, you know, I asked somebody to make a phone call the other day, and they looked at me like I wasn't speaking English. They were like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know my client's phone number. I don't want them to know my phone number. I was like, what? So we are in a different world of communication. And I think that no tool today exists and no workflows really exist to capture the unwritten context behind the emoji, the acronym, whatever it is. So I think about just never-ending chats, or that's not a document, you know, modern attachments. So, I mean, I think that we in 10 years with this conversation is, you know, it's going to be so antiquated. It's going to be different tools. We're going to think about approaching a review in such a different way. And I think dare I say, it's not going to be about reviewing documents anymore. Again, it's just going to be about uncovering information to a point of reasonableness with the courts and with the systems around us.
Great, thanks, Aisling. Matt.
I couldn't agree more with that last point about information being different. You start adding in social media and things along those lines as well. It's just, it's you know, the days of it just being an email and an office doc review are so completely dead. And again, it's a matter of you know, understanding what's in front of you and putting the right pieces in place, whether that's a technology component, whether that is the right attorneys that understand exactly what we're looking for and what we're trying to review. But I also, I'll differ a little bit with what Chris said. I think for the first time, I think our clients are starting to be so much more educated on all aspects of e-discovery, right? They've got e-discovery attorneys in-house now. And that's not just from our corporate clients or our law firm clients, but it's also from whatever government entity we're dealing with, right? Whether it's the FCC or the SEC or the DOJ. There's so much now smarter people when it comes to having conversations around what makes the most sense, whether that's, using, TAR 1.0, TAR 2.0, TAR 3.0, whether that's using CAL. It's being able to have really sophisticated, deep down conversations around what are you trying to do? What is exactly in front of you? And let's put those pieces together, whether that's a technology component, whether that's a person component, whether it's the left hand and the right hand, making sure that every aspect is all thought out to make sure that ultimately you're looking at putting the best dollar forward and not just saying, well, we're going to review 5,000 not responsive or 500,000 not responsive documents and we're all going to make a fortune. Those days are over, right? It's a matter of understanding what's in front of you and making sure that you're the steward to your client's dollar and you're effectively looking after that dollar to the best of your ability.
Thank you, Matt. Claire, you get the last word on this one.
I'm not going to say anything different to what everyone else has said. I essentially 100% agree with everything that they've said. For me, it's that evolution of technology, right? The development of tools to effectively handle these other data types that are bubbling to the surface over and over above those standard office stocks that we're used to seeing. It's the greater, more widespread understanding and acceptance of the benefits of AI in e-discovery in terms of supporting that reduction in time and cost spent on managed review, but also it's not just restricted to review. It's also really how it can support that indispensable human effort involved throughout the entire EDRM. Humans aren't going anywhere. We can just be a bit smarter about what we do. So, it's not about just culling that population. It's being more intelligent about the way that we serve that information up to reviewers for review and about the way that we QC the final work product. And that inevitably just translates to faster conclusions for our clients and ultimately cost savings.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Claire. And thanks so much to all of you panelists. You've been so amazing today. I've learned so much in this conversation. I am also thanking Doug, my co-host. And Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out.
Great. Thanks, Christy. So I agree with Christy. Very informative and enlightening discussion today. I'm in the industry writing about it every day, and I learned quite a bit as well. So I want to thank Aisling, Chris, Claire, and Matt for being our guests on the He Said, She Said podcast, and to Christy for, as always, being an excellent she said to my he said. Look forward to seeing you all next time on the He Said, She Said podcast. Goodbye, and have a great day.